Thank you. Despite searches in the Sinai over many years, no credible archaeological artifacts have been found supporting the Old Testament Exodus story. Yet many believers argue the time interval from at least 1250 BCE to the present has destroyed such evidence. However, the 1996 discovery of a Bronze Age battlefield site next to the Talentz River in northeast Germany dated to between 1300 and 1200 BC and involving far fewer people has already yielded over 13,000 artifacts. Since Northern Europe's climate is generally less hospitable to the preservation of artifacts than the Sinai, is this not an additional talking point to assert the biblical Exodus never occurred?
Could you remind which modern discovery were they referring to that's going to matter?
Bronze Age battlefield site next to Talentz River in northeast Germany, dated to between 1300 and 1200. So it's about the same time distance.
Yeah. No, it's a good comparison. Yeah, no, this idea, you get this, and even critical scholars will sometimes say, "Look, how could you have any remains? It all got wiped out." Did chariots, get buried? What happened to them? They would still be around. And so it's not just the thing in Germany. It's throughout. Let me say several things. One thing is, in terms of remains, many people think that Egypt's the only place where everything's going to remain because of the dry climate. And as it turns out, for most kinds of materials, especially organic materials, it doesn't matter if it's a dry climate or not to survive thousands of years. What matters is that it has a consistent climate of humidity. It's the humidity level. And so, for example, there's this British army camp that was discovered in England where they found letters that these Roman soldiers wrote 2,000 years ago. It was in a bog. Wow. Yeah, because the humidity was constant. And so if the humidity goes up and down, then you forget it. But if it's constant, and so it isn't the amount of time, it isn't the dryness, it's like the consistency. And so, but things like metal will survive, of course, in sand for basically forever. And so there have been many discoveries of, you just think about Paleolithic art. Paleolithic, it still survives. So the point about the Exodus is absolutely right. There's no trace, including, by the way, in the Hebrew Bible, in the book of Numbers, basically most of the 40 years of Israel in the wilderness was at Kadesh Barnea, which is it's this place kind of south of Israel that was like an oasis, a big oasis. And boy, if they dug around in that place and found nothing. The people were there for decades, like eating off of plates, and like sharpening swords and things. There's nothing. So, yeah. And when I was a fundamentalist, we always heard that there are chariots at the bottom of the Red Sea. That's wrong. And so there's nothing in Egypt. There's nothing in the Sinai. There is nothing to suggest it.
And I hope everybody knows you can go in the description and you can actually sign up for your Exodus course that you've done. So you definitely need to check out Bart Ehrman's course on that because he dives into this lots of fun.
There are actually two courses. So I did one on Genesis, which deals with kind of the Pentateuch, but the other is on Exodus through Deuteronomy. And this wilderness stuff, the Exodus, I get into all the historical business on that.
Sign up today. What is your opinion regarding the authenticity of the James ossuary and the Talpiot tomb? Do you believe either or both provide evidence for the existence of Jesus and his family line?
No, I don't think so. I know that my friend James Tabor very much thinks so. And I assume that there are other scholars who do, although I don't think I know of any others. I know a number of archaeologists who don't give it any credence at all. Famous. Eric Myers, Jody Magnus. People. They think that these are not ancient artifacts.
Thank you. Do you think the early Jewish Christians of the Jerusalem church, rather than Paul, had a better understanding of Jesus, his message, and aims, Certainly during the early years, there must have been some in this movement who actually knew Jesus and heard him preach. Few, if any, followed Paul as far as we know.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. James was Jesus' brother. He was the head of the church. Peter was his right-hand man. John was a pillar of the church. Those people spent a long time with Jesus. And I think they probably did have a better understanding of the historical Jesus. Their conflict with Paul, though, doesn't appear to have been about their understanding of the historical Jesus or about their understanding of his death and resurrection. Their big differences with Paul had to do with the relationship of Jew and Gentile. And that was something Jesus probably never talked about.
Wow. So it might have overshadowed a lot of the other stuff. There was so much conflict.
Well, it certainly did eventually. Christianity was about the death and resurrection of Jesus. But that conflict was really, Paul thought it was the biggest. He thought it was the biggest thing that ever hit the planet. This conflict about he thought the Galatians were going to lose their salvation if they would get circumcised, and he blamed the Jerusalem apostles. But he didn't. That was his opinion. I'm not sure they thought it was that important. They just thought, yeah, that's not our view. They agreed on the death and resurrection of Jesus, though.
Why do you think early Jewish Christians objected to eating meat sacrificed to idols as mentioned, for example, in Galatians? Was it because they believed such a sacrifice would allow demons to enter the meat and infect those who ate it, as well as those non-eaters who were nearby, like a virus?
It's not Galatians. It's 1 Corinthians chapters 8 and 10, and also in the book of Revelation. We're not told what the objection is. There are hints about it. The hints about it suggest that some people think that this meat. So the way it works is this. There's kind of a long backstory. I won't give the whole thing, but the basic story is that in the ancient world, you couldn't go to the butcher and buy your meat, or the grocery store. The animals that are killed are being slaughtered, and they're being slaughtered as sacrifices in pagan ritual. And so the worship of God would often involve sacrificing an animal to the god, and the animal, then the fat and the bones would be burned, and the smell would be, that's what the gods liked, and then the humans would keep the meat, and they'd have a party and they'd eat the meat, but then there'd be meat left over, or the meat would be given to the temple, or the priest sold the meat. And so if you ate meat, usually it meant that it had been sacrificed to a pagan god. And so the question about that is, how does that fit in? And the one idea, so it looks like in 1 Corinthians, in the city of Corinth, there are people who are saying there are two groups. One group is saying, look, the pagan gods don't exist. They might think that they're sacrificing this thing to a god. There's no god. So they've got this statue of wood. They sacrifice it in front of us. So what? It's just meat. And so they say, of course we can eat the meat. And there are other people who are saying, look, this is sacrifice to a pagan deity. If you participate in this, you are participating in pagan sacrificial rituals. And so you're giving approbation to pagan practices. You can't do that. Other Christians said you can't do that because they said, yes, those are not gods. They're demons, and you're participating in demon worship. And so there are a variety of views about this within the Christian community. It's not clear that it was Jewish Christians against Gentile Christians. It might have been. It might have been that Jewish Christians were concerned that the food hadn't been sacrificed, since it hadn't been sacrificed in the correct way. It was not kosher. That might have been a thing. I don't know that there's any evidence that demons are entering into the meat and infecting people through that. It's an interesting idea, but I don't know that there's much to say for it. Or maybe against it. We don't really know. But Paul does say in 1 Corinthians 10 that he's kind of debating the matter, and he basically ends up saying, yeah, I don't want you participating in the worship of demons, and so don't eat meat.